this party started, Taria. So for those of you who are just joining us, welcome back to the Influencers Journey Show. Our topic today is what the words freedom of choice really mean. And I am Suzanne Hart, and I'm sitting down with my girl.
Taria Hodge.
Hello. All right. So the first question we want to dive into is, and it's one that is so key because right now we see the world. I think it's almost like we're in two camps where a lot of it's polarized. I know in Canada where people are very polarized, and those polarized situations tend to evoke a lot of emotions and unfortunately quite a bit of judgment. So the question we have on the table is, how do you have opposing beliefs and viewpoints as an influencer and still remain respectful?
Yeah.
And this for me is such a key question because I truly believe that growth happens when we are able to be open to other perspectives. I
Mhm.
also believe change happens when we are able to be open to other perspectives. So, what are your thoughts, Taria?
And the reason why this is such a beautiful question, and it definitely gave me some things to think about, especially coming through this time, in how I have discussions with others. And so and I'm smiling because part of Caribbean culture, we argue over everything, right?
Right.
And sometimes we argue so much we don't understand that we're on the same side and we're saying the same thing. But it's that reminder to stay out of the emotions as much as you possibly can. And when I say that, there's always a point in the conversation where things can get heated. So we have opposing viewpoints, or we have opposing stances.
Mm-hmm.
And what this made me focus on is when we leave the facts and then we go into emotions. And then we start to have conversations from an emotional standpoint. Not to say that emotions are bad or you can't feel things, because that's what emotions are there for, right? But it's when we let our emotions take over and we step into that place of not respecting, the other person, or respecting their viewpoints, and then even allowing things to come out your mouth where, I always joke all the time, then we're going to have to get on national TV and then we're going to have to apologize to everyone. So that's one of the biggest things that comes up for me, is to always make sure that reining in on the emotions, being able to discuss the facts. And if I don't know something, just say I don't know something. And there's a point where, I have to resign and say, well, okay, let me listen more. Let me try to understand more. Is there a way for me to have more empathy in this conversation or in this situation or towards the subject?
I think what's really interesting about this, and if you're listening to make a comment on this, is that what's challenging around this situation is the facts are blurry
Hmm.
and the facts land for people differently.
Yeah.
So the facts land for someone who's in their 80s and have more risk differently than the facts land for someone who's in their 20s. The facts land all different ways for different people, depending on our walk of life, how we see ourselves in the world. And so, even as we stick to the facts, it's also our opinions on the facts in terms of how the facts impact us.
Hmm.
And so, for me, I think how you remain respectful in opposing beliefs and opinions is to one, be okay with opposing beliefs and
Hmm.
opinions. I think the other thing that's really clear for me, and I used to remind myself of this when I worked with my teams, is to make someone feel wrong, to make someone feel stupid, or to make someone feel excluded because their opinion is different. It
Hmm.
doesn't affect change in any way, way, shape, or form. Because I know when you make me feel silly or wrong for my point of view, I dig in.
Mm.
Right? I dig in, and now I'm a right fighter.
Mm.
However, if you allow me to express my opinion without judgment or condemnation, which we see a lot happening
Yeah.
right now, I'm more than likely to have a discussion with you. I know for myself, I have friends that are vaccinated, not vaccinated, both sides of the coin.
Right.
And what has allowed us to maintain relatedness is our willingness to talk, not just about the facts, but about how the facts land for each and every one of us.
Mm-hmm.
Our willingness to talk from different perspectives, our willingness to be there for each other as people work through the myriad of emotions, thoughts, complications that come with this. And that's how we've remained respectful, because first of all, you are my friend and a human being with the right to another opinion first. And then we got to work through this thing.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's kind of the looking at it, and always reminding that, if I stand in the right to have freedom of choice, it's not, you don't get to have freedom of choice when you agree with me.
Yeah. And I
You
think
don't.
and I think that that's such a good way and a good reminder that we, relationships are so beautiful when we take the time to cultivate them, and we know that we're going to have these beautiful relationships with people who don't always have the same viewpoint. And I think that that's what makes relationships so great, because we're
Mhm.
not all the same. I've learned a whole lot from about some of my friends in this situation.
Yeah,
Just
yeah, absolutely.
just being able to unpack their choices, their thought process, you know, how they arrive to certain discussions, or certain way of thinking, beliefs, and all of that is really great to, just like I said, be able to be cognizant and aware that, what, I don't always have to argue to prove a point. And I think that that's the growth. Sometimes, we get caught in that, oh, I have to make sure that I'm right, or I have to prove a point, or I have to knock somebody over the head to see my point of view. And it really isn't about that. Is like when you sit and you said, what I'm going to do here is listen, what can I learn from
Mhm.
this? And always seeking the opportunity to learn more, gain more information. And and after you get that, what are you going to do with it? So with the information that I've just gathered here, or the things that I've just learned here, does my viewpoint remain the same,
You,
or
you
is there,
know,
is there
I'm
adjustments?
I'm looking at Dr. Crystal's comment, and she says, "So good morning, Dr. Crystal. Happy to have you here." And agreeing to disagree, and each other's point of view is valid. And it really brings us to the next question that we have on the table: is what happens when you get stuck in opposing us and them camps. And I don't know about wherever you live in the world, but here there are big us and them camps. And what actually motivated this conversation? I was scrolling on uh, on social media, and there was a stream of talk around with people that were not vaccinated, and it was like this us and them conversation. And then I
Mhm.
rolled over, and then there was, in another post, there was a stream of comments of
Right.
a group of people that were vaccinated, and it was this us and them conversation. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And what I want to put on the table for everybody is, we've been through a time where diversity, equity, inclusion has been key conversation. And what I find and what I find really interesting is that we are in a diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation now. It's
Yes.
just not based on skin color.
Yes.
It's based on a choice. It's based on difference. And so it's fascinating to me that we see it when it's one thing, and we don't
Mhm.
see it when it's another, and it comes back to the right to choose.
Yeah.
And so as I watched this conversation and I watched the two camps, and it was almost like there was things being thrown at the other camp, if we could, if we could just like throw things at each other in terms of our language and our words. And our words were, the words that were being used were exclusive, they were condemning, they were
Mhm.
damning. And I thought, wow,
Yeah.
this is really interesting, like polarization at its very best. And so I want to share quickly a conversation I had with a friend of mine. And so we were having a conversation, not vaccinated, and she looked at me and she said, "This is the first time." So not vaccinated, white female, and
Mhm.
she said, "This is the first time I've actually experienced exclusion
Mm.
relate to what you talk about."
Wow.
And and I said, "Wow." And I said, "I feel so sad for you right now because that exclusion is painful,
Hmm.
to be excluded from places and spaces that you traditionally go because you have a choice." Now, for me, it's not a choice. It's just I walk in this beautiful caramel color, you know, thing called my melanin skin, and so exclusion has happened over time, and it's a hurtful thing when it occurs, and just the pain of her grappling with what to do and where to stand. And that to me was so key because I think when we get caught in the polarization of our points of views, we forget the humanity and
Yeah.
the pain and the decisions and what brought people to these decisions. And I think this is so key as we talk as influencers again, because a great influencer in my mind is able to pull back and look at the
Mhm.
landscape of diversity, equity, and inclusion and say, now what?
Yeah.
What do I do? And how do I have people feel not victimized, excluded, even in the presence of a difficult
Mhm.
decision?
Mhm.
That's
This,
challenging.
yeah, this brings to mind one of the things that I hear all the time, and it's the agendas that people create and how agendas are served when you do pull people apart. So having, a viewpoint here, and a lot of times I really do think it's intentional, like
Mhm,
some influencers do it intentionally. But here's the thing that also came up for me in unpacking this conversation about having the freedom of choice, and I think you alluded to it or you said it up front, but I just wanted to bring it back home here. This is such an important conversation because when we don't think about how the freedom to choose affects everyone across the board. Like one of the things that came up for me, we can't talk about having the freedom to choose in this situation and not take a look at other issues that we have in our communities, right? So it has made me go back and really sit and think about, wow, how have I excluded others?
mhm,
Okay, how have I been walking through the world with a viewpoint that I consciously chose or something I just unconsciously like fell into because it's the conversation that's around? Like, what are the things that come up as, a person that makes you feel like you're better than somebody else or you're on a different status or a different level because you have an opposing viewpoint or this is your decision. And so it's
yeah,
that polarization. It's such an interesting thing to unpack and challenge ourselves to
mhm,
really think about what happens when we take people or we try to take people's freedoms away, or we align ourselves with those camps that that's the agenda, is like the divide and conquer agenda.
And it's interesting because one of the reasons I love the fact of calling this conversation freedom of choice
Mm,
is because so it's vaccinated or not vaccinated today, and we get to choose freedom of choice. It may be something else tomorrow.
mm,
We've been through the right to what we do with our bodies as women, freedom of choice.
right.
We've been through sexual orientation, freedom of choice, get to choose who I love. We there's so many topics that are that go back to our right to choose.
Mhm.
And so what I really wanted people to think about was pull back a little bit and
Right.
say, okay, this is a choice matter. And am I okay with my choices being eliminated? Am
Mhm.
I okay with someone's choice being eliminated? It's not as simple as we'd like to say. And I'm also saying that in the context of I don't actually know the right answer.
Yeah.
And part of me is really great, grateful that I'm not the decision maker in this. However, what I also know is given that I don't have the right answer, can I create a
Mm.
environment for conversation
For dialogue,
where
yes.
I am not hurling insults or judgments at someone who has an opinion other than mine?
Yeah.
Can I hold environment for solution, um, where both sides come to the table and have a conversation? It's all that
Yeah.
stuff, and it's not easy
Yeah.
at all,
Yeah.
right? So I want to jump into the other question. So what is the responsibilities that come
Mhm.
when you choose? And I think this is it's a money question.
Mhm.
It's a money question because as someone who if as people work and they become more influential in their life, we all are going to choose a place where we sit,
Yeah.
and with that comes responsibilities. And when you are in the position of power, you choose a position where you sit, and with that comes
Mhm.
responsibilities. I will also say that one of the things I know for myself are the people that I admire are the people who stand for something,
Yeah.
right? And they stand for something, and they're willing to take responsibility for that stance.
Mhm.
You see that over and over again in history. Even if they're wrong
Mhm.
and they have to come back and apologize for the stance
Right.
that they took, the people that have moved me are those people who you see the character of an individual. I'm standing here right now. I'm gonna take 100% responsibility for standing in this place. And if I find out my stance needs to evolve or I was wrong, I'll come back and clean it up. What are our responsibilities in these situations? Because no choice comes without
Yeah.
responsibility.
Mhm. Comes without consequence. And it's so funny. I was having that conversation with my younger daughter. We weren't exactly talking about this, but I said to myself, she must have been reading my, run up show, because because she said the same thing. We do have, or we do have the freedom of choice. We were talking about something else. We do have the freedom of choice, but there is consequences for those choices. And I think great work, and it leaves a lot to be said for those individuals who, when they do choose, that they sit and they think, about, you know all of the consequences, all of the things that come with it, the responsibility, how are they going to move forward, what's the impact, and then from there, like, am I holding, firm in this because this is what I believe. But you also said something that's also so beautiful, is what I love to see in leaders and the people that I respect the most is as they grow, to their next level, and
Hmm.
with experience, with knowledge, all of the things that they've gained, they, will say, hey, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I thought that this was the case. But in that time, I've gone through some things. I've learned some things. I've had some experiences. And you know what? That's not necessarily the same anymore. And
Yeah.
to be able to admit, like, okay, I have a shift, in viewpoint, and have the dialogue about it as to why. Because that's the other part that we don't see sometimes, or even if we do see it, it could be confusing to people, like, oh, you said that. We were talking about Kevin Hart before we got on.
Yeah.
You said that, and they will bring it up. And when you really go back and look at it, well, he said that 10 years ago. Okay, where was
Mhm.
he 10 years ago, in his growth? 10 years later, how many experiences later? You know what? Maybe my way of thinking, wasn't the best at this time, but I've grown into this person
Mhm.
now. And so now I could come back out and I could share from this perspective. This
Yeah.
is what I've learned.
Yeah, it was I kind of watched his documentary on
Hmm.
that piece, and I think what made me so respectful of what he did was he took a stance and he said, I've grown, I've gone through this. And then over time, when sometimes we don't see the impact of something
Hmm.
in the same way it's being experienced. When
Right.
he finally got the impact, he was able to come back and say, I didn't see that,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
When I took my stance. And as I've grown, I'm back to say, I apologize. Like I messed up because I didn't see that.
Hmm.
I didn't see this piece of the equation. And I think part of why this is so key is that as we sit in whatever places and spaces we are, there's responsibility for ourselves in terms of making a decision. However, there's also responsibilities to other people, other groups, other individuals. And I think part of it is the interesting thing about our freedom to choose is our freedom to choose comes with responsibility. I have a responsibility to myself, but I also have a bigger responsibility to other people.
Yes.
And it's that dance in between those places and spaces. And I know for myself, the challenge in this situation was what's my responsibility to myself in terms of what I believe for Suzanne.
Hmm.
However, what's my responsibility to the greater good in terms of of the impact of my choice on others? And so for me, I'm still in that conversation because
Hmm.
that's the murky one for me. And and I think for a lot of people, that's the murky conversation is if I make my choice, what is the impact on others? And is there an impact on others?
Hmm.
And or am I making a choice that just impacts me? And if I'm making a choice that just impacts me, why can't I make that choice and be responsible for the consequences of that choice? Or does my choice have a ramification? And I think there's where it gets muddy for a
Yeah.
lot of people.
So it's in this particular situation that we are talking about with, the vaccine and COVID. It's those hard realizations that we have to, come to. And I know for me saying that I respect, choice means that I have to, find a way to be okay with some things I'm not okay with. Like, no one wants to think of, having a loved one, taking, getting, COVID and getting sick, but in the dis in and passing on, heaven forbid. But in the conversations, like when you meet those individuals who have that stance that says, this is what I believe, this is and this is why I believe what I believe. You just have to be, you pray, and you just have to be okay, because that's their choice. And you
Absolutely.
and you continue, to love them. You don't shun them. You don't, like I said, you don't create that divide. You don't see them in a different light. But you just have to say, well, this is the choice that they've made, and as a friend, the best thing that I could do is to honor and respect
Choice.
that
That
choice.
choice. Absolutely. And I think that is where we all grow as individuals. I've had friends, both vaccinated and not vaccinated, pass away.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, and I've had them, all sorts of situations have come up as a result of this. And I think the piece is really, what would that person want for themselves?
Right,
How would they want us to be as they have chosen? And I think the part is they would want us to celebrate their right to have chosen,
right.
and on either side. And I think there's unknowns on both sides,
Mhm,
and so it's really around, yeah, they'd want us to honor their right to have chosen, even in disagreement with the choice. Can we honor, because I know I have made choices that other people have not agreed with, and
mhm.
the people I who loved me enough to allow me to choose and say, girl, I don't see that, but go on. Go on. My mother said, go on with your bad self. I don't see it at all. Right. Or she said, go on with your grown self. And 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 can you love me a lot enough to let me
Yeah,
journey?
yeah.
However, and to be there to support me when I fall
Mhm.
down.
Yeah.
And so it's that stuff that we're really grappling